Imagine spending 54 years in a maximum security void. I mean, no trial, no judge, no release date.
Yeah, you're just erased by the system.
Right. And, well, welcome to today's deep dive. We're looking at the Indian Constitution today, and we are starting not with abstract, dusty laws, but with the terrifying reality of what happens when a nation's operating system completely fails.
Exactly, because when you think about reading a constitution, it sounds a lot like reading an instruction manual for a complicated piece of machinery.
Yeah, like you expect dry technical rules about, I don't know, how elections are run or which branch of government does
All
what.
right, but if you actually look closely, a constitution is a deeply human document. It's a record of a nation's deepest values and perhaps more importantly, a record of its historical traumas.
Wow, yeah. So today we are unpacking the very bedrock of Indian democracy, which is the fundamental rights. And our stack of notes today comes from a detailed constitutional study, specifically Chapter 2 of Indian Constitution at Work.
It's a really comprehensive source.
It is. So, okay, let's unpack this because to understand why these rights matter to you, the person listening right now, we have to look at flesh and blood human beings. We have to see what actually happens when these rights are treated as just, ink on a page.
That is the core of it. When a society fails to enforce its constitutional promises, all that legal jargon just fades away,
Yeah.
and you are left with staggering human costs.
Right.
There is a case study in our sources regarding a man named Machal Lolong that perfectly illustrates this. He was from a village in the Moregaon district of Assam,
Okay.
and when Machal was 23 years old, he was arrested and charged with causing grievous injuries. But during his initial processing, he was found mentally too unstable to stand trial.
Which means he became what's called an under trial, right? Like someone
Right.
held in custody while waiting for a legal process to play out.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
So the system sent him to a mental hospital in Tejpur for treatment.
Okay, which, I mean, on the surface, that sounds like a functional bureaucracy providing necessary medical care before a trial,
Right.
right?
It does. And the wild part is, the treatment actually worked. The doctors explicitly wrote to the jail authorities in 1967, and then again decades later in 1996, stating that Mashal was completely fit to stand trial.
But the trial never happened.
It never happened. The system simply forgot he existed.
That is, I mean, that's just terrifying.
Yeah, he remained in judicial custody for decades. He was finally released in July 2005.
Oh my.
He was 77 years old. He spent 54 years in custody, an entire lifetime, utterly erased by a bureaucratic void. And his case never once came up for a single hearing.
54 years without standing in front of a judge? That is chilling. Like, how was he even eventually released?
He was only freed because a special team appointed by the National Human Rights Commission just happened to intervene during a random inspection.
Wow. So if they hadn't showed up.
He would have likely died in custody. The Constitution legally demands a fair and speedy trial under the fundamental right to life and liberty. For Mashal, that right was totally violated.
And it's not just single, isolated oversights where things fall through the cracks like that. Sometimes it happens in broad daylight on a massive scale.
For sure.
Like, think back to the 1982 Asian Games in New Delhi. Our sources bring this up. This was a massive moment of national pride requiring huge infrastructure, stadiums, flyovers.
Yeah, a massive logistical undertaking.
Right. And to get it done, the government engaged contractors. And those contractors brought in a massive workforce of extremely poor migrant workers from all over the country.
And this is where the exploitation became completely systemic.
Yeah.
These workers were kept in horrific working conditions and paid significantly less than the government-mandated minimum wage.
Right. And it actually took a team of social scientists noticing this to step in, didn't it?
Yeah, they petitioned the Supreme Court, arguing that paying someone less than the minimum wage isn't just a bad business practice. It legally amounts to bigar, or forced labor.
Which is such a fascinating legal argument, because the logic is that if you are so destitute that you have no choice but to accept starvation wages, your labor isn't truly voluntary.
Exactly, and the Supreme Court agreed with that. They ruled that this was a direct violation of the fundamental right against exploitation. So they directed the government to ensure those thousands of workers got their rightful prescribed wages.
But I want you, the listener, to imagine something for a second. Put yourself in these scenarios. What if Mashal Lolong had been a rich, powerful man with connections?
Right.
Or what if those workers building the stadiums for the Asian Games had been, I don't know, highly paid structural engineers? Do you think they would have been locked up for 54 years without a trial?
They're forced to work for pennies.
Exactly.
So-
Probably not.
Yeah.
The system tends to listen when you have money and power.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, this is precisely why democracies require a formalized written Bill of Rights.
Yeah.
It is easy to think of rights as protection from other citizens or, private corporations. But the most formidable, overwhelming threat to an individual, it's the government itself.
Oh, absolutely. The legislature, the executive branch, the
Yeah.
police.
The vast bureaucracy,
Mm-hmm.
in the course of their everyday functioning, they have the immense power to crush an individual. A Bill of Rights legally binds the government. It protects you from the state's own machinery.
So how does that actually work in practice? I mean, how do you take a philosophical concept like rights and build it into the architecture of a nation?
Well, I've heard a Bill of Rights described as a warranty card.
Think about when you buy a new television. You get that piece of paper in the box that guarantees if the machine malfunctions, there is a remedy.
Right.
A Bill of Rights is a constitutional warranty card. It guarantees you a remedy if the government malfunctions and violates your basic human dignity.
That is a highly effective way to visualize it. But we have to remember how a warranty card actually functions in the real world. A piece of paper doesn't magically fix a broken television. True, you have to actually take it somewhere.
Exactly. You have to physically take it to the repair shop.
Yeah.
In this constitutional system, the repair shop is the judiciary. If your rights are violated, you have the specific, guaranteed right to approach the Supreme Court or the high courts to enforce them.
So the courts have the power to actually issue special orders to the government to restore those rights.
Yes, they can legally compel the state to act.
That makes perfect sense. It's an active mechanism, not just a passive list on a wall. And it really highlights the difference between these fundamental rights and what we might call just, ordinary legal rights.
How so?
Well, I was thinking about it like a smartphone. An ordinary law is like an app on your phone. The government can download a new one, delete an old one, or push an update pretty easily through standard lawmaking.
Right.
But fundamental rights, that's the hard-coded operating system.
It is a really solid analogy.
Right.
But let's take it a step further regarding how you update that operating system. No ordinary law will do. You need a massive constitutional amendment, which is intentionally difficult to achieve.
Because you don't want the government messing with the OS every time they feel like it.
Exactly. No organ of the government can legally act in a manner that violates these rights. If they try to pass a law that unreasonably restricts them, the judiciary has the constitutional responsibility to strike it down.
And it's fascinating to look at how different countries arrive at the design of their specific operating systems. During the Indian freedom struggle, leaders realized early on they needed this protection against the British rulers.
Yes, the historical context is everything.
The Motilal Nehru Committee was demanding a Bill of Rights way back in 1928. So when independence finally came, these rights were always going to be front and center.
Because context dictates the content of a constitution. Consider the comparison with the South African Constitution, which was inaugurated in December 1996.
Right. Our sources contrast these two.
India was emerging from colonial rule, but South Africa was emerging from the horrors of apartheid, drafting their constitution under the very real, looming threat of a civil war.
Which explains why South Africa's Bill of Rights is incredibly expensive. It's not just, freedom of speech.
Yeah, it goes much further.
They explicitly grant the right to adequate housing, to health care, food, water, social security. They even codified the right to a healthy environment.
It's incredibly comprehensive.
It's as if they looked at every single way a human being was degraded during apartheid and built a constitutional fortress against it.
That historical trauma shaped their specific safeguards. Which brings us perfectly back to the Indian context and the very first pillar of its fundamental rights, which is the right to equality.
Right.
For a society as historically diverse and deeply historically stratified as India, this was perhaps the most crucial right to hard code into the system.
So to really grasp this, how does a society even measure if equality is working?
You measure it by looking at the extremes of daily life. The sources give us two really powerful scenarios to visualize this.
Okay, let's hear them.
Scenario 1. A man named Swadesh Kumar visits his village with a friend. They stop at a roadside hotel for tea.
Simple enough.
Right. The shopkeeper knows Swadesh, but specifically asks the friend his name to figure out his caste. Once the shopkeeper realizes the friend is a Dalit, a group historically relegated to the very bottom of the traditional Hindu caste system and subjected to untouchability. Swadesh is served his tea in a nice, clean mug, but his friend is served in a disposable earthen cup.
Wow. Just a blatant everyday humiliation.
Exactly. Now, scenario 2. A television channel abruptly tells 4 of its newsreaders that they can no longer read the news on screen.
Okay.
All 4 are women, and the reason given is simply that they've turned 45. Meanwhile, 2 male newsreaders of the exact same age are kept on the air without any issue.
So both scenarios represent clear, unacceptable discrimination, one based on caste, the other on gender.
Precisely. The Constitution's right to equality was designed to surgically dismantle these exact practices. It legally mandates equal access to public places, shops, hotels, places of entertainment, wells, bathing ghats.
Right, because historically those were highly restricted.
Yes. It strictly prohibits discrimination on the grounds of religion, race, caste, sex, or place of birth. Furthermore, it explicitly abolished the practice of untouchability, recognizing it as one of the crudest manifestations of inequality.
And it stripped away entrenched social hierarchies by abolishing the conferring of titles, right? Like you can't be legally elevated above someone else by birth.
Exactly.
Okay, but I have to play devil's advocate here because this is where the practical application gets messy. The Constitution promises equality of opportunity, right? It says the state can't discriminate in public employment. So how is it constitutional for the government to have reservations, what some people might call quotas or affirmative action, in government jobs and university admissions for specific communities?
It's a very common question.
Doesn't creating a special lane for certain groups directly contradict the fundamental idea of equality?
What's fascinating here is that the framers of the Constitution anticipated your exact hesitation. It sounds like a contradiction, but only if you look at equality in a vacuum.
Okay, unpack that.
They address this directly in Article 16, Clause 4. They understood a profound truth, which is that true equality doesn't mean simply treating everyone identically when the society itself is profoundly unequal.
Right.
Think of it like this. If 2 runners are in a race, but one has been forced to wear a 50-pound weight for their entire life, firing the starting gun and saying you both have equal opportunity now is practically a cruel joke.
The 50-pound weight being historical, systemic inequality.
Yes. The Constitution explicitly clarifies that implementing special schemes for the betterment of children, women, and socially and educationally backward classes is not a violation of the right to equality.
So it's actually baked into the definition of equality.
Exactly. Reservations are actively required to fulfill the spirit of equal opportunity. Substantive equality means you cannot achieve equal outcomes without addressing historical handicaps.
So what does that historical weight actually look like when it hits the real world, like when people actually push back against it?
It looks violent, honestly. There is a documented case study in the sources regarding a man named Hari Bandhu from the Puri district in Odisha.
Oh.
He identifies as a member of the Dalit community, and he detailed how men from his community finally refused to follow a deeply degrading local custom.
What was the custom?
They were expected to wash the feet of the groom and the guests of upper caste families during marriage ceremonies, clear the leftovers, and wash all the utensils.
Oh.
They finally said no. Their children were educated and they refused to continue the practice.
Good for them. But what was the reaction to that refusal?
Brutal revenge. 4 women from Hari Bandhu's community were beaten up, and another was paraded naked, just for refusing to wash someone's feet.
That is horrific.
It is. And if you, the listener, play judge here, does this involve a violation of fundamental rights?
I mean, it has to be. It's a complete denial of human dignity.
Absolutely. It is a violent enforcement of untouchability and forced labor. It demonstrates exactly why the right to equality isn't just a passive legal concept. It requires active, sometimes forceful state intervention to dismantle entrenched social evils.
But here is where the system faces its biggest stress test. We've established that the state must step in to enforce equality, like stepping in to stop untouchability and violence. But how much power can we safely give the state to do that before it starts crushing individual freedom?
That is the ultimate balancing act.
Right, because we need the state to be strong enough to protect us, but restrained enough not to oppress us. And that brings us to the next pillar, which is freedom.
Exactly. Liberty means freedom of thought, expression, and action. But it's defined so that an individual can enjoy their freedom without endangering law and order or threatening the rights of others.
The whole "my right to swing my fist ends where your nose begins" idea.
Exactly. And at the absolute core of this is Article 21, the protection of life and personal liberty. It states that no person shall be deprived of their life or personal liberty except according to the procedure established by law.
Meaning the state can't just snatch you off the street in the middle of the night. You have the right to know exactly why you're being arrested. You have the right to a lawyer.
Yes, due process.
And crucially, the police have to take you before a magistrate, a judge outside the police force, within 24 hours to prove the arrest is justified.
And what is really remarkable is how the courts have interpreted Article 21 over time. They reasoned that the right to life doesn't just mean mere animal existence, just breathing. It means a life with human dignity.
Right.
Through various judgments, they expanded the right to life to include the right to shelter and the right to a livelihood. Because you cannot truly have a right to life if you are deprived of the means to sustain that life.
Now, here's where it gets really interesting and honestly, highly contradictory based on our notes.
Oh, I know where you're going with this.
Yeah, in the very same document outlining these incredible protections for personal liberty, there's a section on something called preventive detention.
Yes.
If I understand the mechanism correctly, the government can arrest you and lock you up for up to 3 months without following any of those normal procedures we just talked about.
That is correct.
No lawyer, no 24-hour magistrate visit, and not because you committed a crime, but simply because they apprehend you might do something unlawful.
Yeah.
How do we square that with liberty?
It is arguably the most intense inherent tension within the document itself. Preventive detention is designed as a tool for the government to deal proactively with severe threats to law and order, or the security of the nation.
But isn't it incredibly ironic? I mean, the framers of this Constitution had just fought a massive revolution against a colonial power.
Yes.
And the British constantly used preventative detention to lock up Indian freedom fighters without trial. Why would they write the exact same tool of oppression into their own new rulebook?
It is a striking paradox, truly. They included it because they were terrified of the new, fragile nation fracturing apart. They felt they needed a strong tool to stop subversives and antisocial elements.
But it just seems so ripe for abuse.
You are right to be alarmed. It bypasses standard due process entirely. While cases are eventually brought before an advisory board for review after 3 months, the provision is highly susceptible to misuse by the state.
Yeah, and there's a quote from the Constituent Assembly debates in 1947 that perfectly captures this anxiety. A member named Somnath Lahiri stood up and complained bitterly about how these rights were being drafted.
Oh, his speech is famous.
He said, "I feel that many of these fundamental rights have been framed from the point of view of a police constable. Almost every article is followed by a proviso which takes away the right almost completely."
Lahiri's critique was very sharp. He recognized that while the Constitution granted freedoms like speech, assembly, and movement, it immediately attached restrictions in the name of public order, peace, and morality.
Like, you can speak freely unless...
Exactly. For example, you have the freedom to assemble peacefully, but it must be without arms. The government retains the power to declare an assembly of 5 or more people unlawful if they deem it a threat. Lahiri worried these caveats gave way too much power back to the administration, making it too easy for the state to deny genuine, peaceful protest.
He essentially wanted a pure, unrestricted declaration of rights, but the framers ultimately decided that absolute freedom could lead to anarchy, so they drew a line.
They did.
And we see the state drawing very firm lines when it comes to individuals exploiting each other. The right against exploitation explicitly bans the trafficking of human beings, and it outlaws the employment of children under the age of 14 in hazardous jobs like factories and mines.
Which is absolutely vital in a country with millions of underprivileged citizens who are vulnerable to exactly that kind of abuse by landlords, moneylenders, and wealthy contractors.
Right.
By making child labor illegal, the Constitution attempts to forcibly break the generational cycle of poverty and exploitation.
We also have to look at the right to freedom of religion, which is huge in India. Historically, rulers often forced their subjects to follow the official state religion or actively persecuted them if they didn't.
Yes.
This constitution guarantees the freedom to choose, profess, follow, and critically propagate any religion, or, to choose no religion at all.
Right.
But playing devil's advocate again, propagating religion in a deeply diverse, highly populated country sounds like a recipe for constant conflict. Where does the state draw the line on propagation?
This raises an important question about boundaries.
Mm.
The right to propagate guarantees that you can spread information about your faith and seek to attract others to it.
Okay.
However, the court's been very clear that this does not include the right to forcible conversions. Conversions based on intimidation, coercion, or inducement are strictly unprotected.
Okay, that makes sense. But what happens when a religious practice actively harms people? Can the state step in then?
Yes, the right to religious freedom is not absolute. The government has the constitutional authority to impose restrictions to protect public order, morality, and health.
Ah, so there are limits.
More importantly, the state can and does interfere in religious matters to root out severe social evils. Historically, the government has banned practices like satiket, which is the burning of widows' bigamy, and human sacrifice.
I imagine when the state bans those things, religious groups argue it's an unconstitutional interference in their faith.
They often do. But the Constitution empowers the state to prioritize human life, dignity, and equality over regressive religious customs. It is a constant active balancing act between respecting religious freedom and ensuring basic human rights are not violated in the name of faith.
So bringing it all together, what does this all mean for you, the person listening right now? We started this deep dive by saying a constitution isn't just a dry instruction manual.
Far from it.
The realities we've gone through today prove that beyond a shadow of a doubt. The fundamental rights are the active, breathing boundaries of our daily lives. They are the mechanisms that protect us from the worst impulses of each other and the overreach of the state itself.
Yeah, well said.
They are a constant, difficult negotiation between individual liberty, saying what you want, praying how you want, and the broader public good.
They represent a nation's ongoing attempt to fulfill its highest promises to its citizens. But it is crucial to remember that these promises aren't static.
What do you mean?
Well, over the past 6 decades, the scope of these rights has expanded through judicial interpretation and legislative amendment. The right to education wasn't originally a fundamental right in India. It was made one later.
Oh, wow.
The right to livelihood was read into the right to life by the courts. South Africa explicitly wrote environmental protections into their 1996 constitution because they recognized a new existential threat.
Constitutions are living documents. They adapt to recognize new vulnerabilities.
Precisely. Which leaves us with a really compelling thought to consider.
Okay, lay it on us.
If the rights we've discussed today were born out of the traumas of colonialism, untouchability, and historical exploitation, what completely new fundamental right will the next generation need to write down to protect themselves from the unique threats of the modern world?
Oh, that's fascinating.
Will it be the right to digital privacy, protection from algorithmic bias, or perhaps the right to neurological sovereignty as technology advances?
That is a wild thought to leave on. The ink on the warranty card is never really dry, is it?
Never.
Well, thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep asking questions, keep looking closely at the structures around you, and always, always read the fine print of your world. See you next time.